Right now, let's talk about a very different story. Let's talk about the, absolutely extraordinary revelation that hundreds, if not thousands, of officers who may be corrupt, have links to organised crime or are sexual predators, may be serving in England and Wales in the police force. This is according to the Inspectorate of Constabulary, the police watchdog. We spoke to the head of that organisation a little bit earlier on the show, Matt Parr, who said that he was shocked by the findings of his report. Let's talk about this right now with former Metropolitan Police Chief Superintendent Parm Sandhu. She's also author of her memoirs of her time as an officer, Black and Blue. Good morning to you, Parm.
Good morning, Julia.
We have spoken to you so many times on this show, and it's always so good to get your input, not just as a former officer, but someone who has spoken out about these issues, but also as a female officer, because that was something that really shocked the Inspectorate in terms of their findings of what female police officers had to say about what was going on behind the scenes. But you and I talked about this in the wake of Wayne Couzens. We discovered that Sarah Everard, during one of the lockdown periods, walking home, she had been stopped, abducted, raped and murdered by Wayne Couzens, a serving police officer. This idea that this man had somehow made it into the police force, had made it through vetting, transferred police forces a number of times, and no one had picked up on the fact that this man was a sexual predator. He was a risk to women, and yet the system did not root him out at the beginning or at any point in the middle of that. I mean, I imagine that you, reading that report today, weren't actually shocked by what you heard.
I welcome the report. I'm not shocked by reading the report, but I'm pleased that it's been put on, on paper and it's been written about, because now the chief constables up and down the country, and this isn't just a Met issue, but all chief constables up and down the country have to read that report and now have to come up with a plan to how they're going to deal with it. Because Wayne Couzens wasn't alone. There was a whole group of them who transferred into the Met together. But this report actually gives you some case studies. And one of the most shocking ones I read in this report was a person who is a serving police officer who's got 2 issues of domestic violence behind him, where marks were left on the neck of a woman, not just once, 2 different women, 2 different partners. And then there's another case study where a serving police officer used a knife against his partner. And these people are serving police officers now.
Yeah.
But, this isn't just about sexism and misogyny. This is about the behaviours, corruption and the lack of vetting.
Yeah.
Because one of the ones that really shocked me, excuse me, was a person who has been involved in robbing an old woman who was knocked to the ground, an 80-year-old woman who was knocked to the ground, robbed. That man is a police officer now. And it's just, you read it. And I try not to be shocked, because we have had Wayne Couzens, we have had a serving officer commit a murder. Yeah. When you read these ones, you think it's just a matter of time before it happens again.
Exactly. That's the key thing. He wasn't a one-off. We don't know about the other cases. And this is the thing. And some of this vetting will be, different levels of what someone's done. Look, someone getting up to something, getting up to no good in their teenage years and then seeing the error of their ways, turning their lives around. I don't want those people to be stopped from being police officers. I think they'd make really good police officers, actually, in terms of understanding the mindset and being able to communicate with people and perhaps having, their ear to the ground. But as you say, cases of domestic violence and cases like that, unless there is a really, really strong story behind to explain why that, they've now become a campaigner, they've had therapy, I don't know, whatever it is, maybe there are stories, and we want people to have redemption. But the idea that these people should be going through this interview process, being apparently vetted and checked, their social media accounts, all of that, and still getting through is terrifying. And this is a fascinating thing that they did in terms of this report. This was Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services looked at 8 forces. They were asked to do this by the former Home Secretary Priti Patel in the wake of the Wayne Couzens conviction. And they basically looked at 11,277 police officers and staff, and they looked at over 700 vetting files. They basically went through right, let's look at this officer. When they were interviewed, what vetting was done? What was known at the point when they were hired? And when they transferred to this force, or their 10-year vetting they have to go through, what happened then? And they have found again and again that dozens and dozens, even and if you extrapolate from the 8 forces they looked at, hundreds, possibly thousands of officers are being hired, being allowed to continue as police officers, despite... No, I mean, red flag doesn't do justice. to these things. People, with criminal gangland links, in heavy debt, possibly, bribable, blackmailable, people, say, with domestic violence convictions, other convictions. These people are making it through the vetting procedure. It's not we didn't know he was a wrong 'un. There's evidence on record, on official records, this person's a wrong 'un. How is that happening? How is that possible?
Julia, I agree with you that if a person makes a mistake when they're a juvenile, they shouldn't be barred from joining the police service. And I also have to make the point that the majority of police officers are good, caring individuals. They are there for the right reasons. But unfortunately, some of these individuals who have joined, they have lied on their application forms, they've lied on their vetting forms. And then when they come to notice, so if they come to notice for a domestic violence incident or something else, they have to self-report. They're supposed to tell their employers that that's happened. So if they commit offences off the area that they're working in, why are they going to then go and tell their employer when they've lied in the first place? So that's where it falls down. And when you talk about the vetting that's supposed to happen every 10 years, I know that people who don't move around, don't go for promotion, don't go and work in counter-terrorism or wherever, they haven't been re-vetted. And it needs to start with the re-vetting of all police officers to find out what's in that pot, who needs to be got rid of, and who needs to be sacked immediately. Yeah. Because my concern is you're going to have members of the public who are sitting there who need help. Yeah. They are going to think twice about ringing for help because they're going to be thinking, am I going to get one of these officers who is a perpetrator?
Yeah, and again, it's the position of power they have. And we've seen, particularly in the case of women, we saw some very racist, xenophobic WhatsApps that were reported in some of the cases. We've seen some police officer groups, but also incredibly misogynistic. And we're not talking about someone making a comment about someone's clothing. We're not talking about, women I'd like to rape. Joking about these things. Really, really scary stuff. The idea that if you're a female police officer, you're sitting, late at night, with another police officer in a police car, or with some guy who's got you on his rape list. I mean, I don't know how it's possible to feel safe, not only as just a woman in society generally, but as a woman police officer. How do we root out these people when there is still this canteen culture of cover-up? And so that even though everyone will know they're a wrong 'un, they, like Wayne Couzens, his nickname was Mr. the Rapist or something. Now, that was actually his nickname in the station, for goodness sake. How do we root it out if the people who say, I think this guy is dangerous, I think this guy needs to be vetted or thrown out, that person is the person who is punished by their fellow officers in the canteen culture?
This report actually highlights that, in that some female officers won't report their colleagues because then they are ostracised. They are labelled as the troublemakers, the grass, and that when they're out on patrol, they can't rely on backup coming because a whole team will turn against them. So if there's no safe environment, and this is where the change needs to come, there needs to be a safe environment for officers to report each other. And one of the laughable things I found about this report was that they have now decided to define what misogyny is. Now, most people know what misogyny is. Do you actually need police officers who have been through intensive training to be taught what misogyny is so that they don't break the rules themselves?
Yeah, I do worry about different people's definitions of these things because, again, I don't want people sacked because they made a comment about, like, oh, you look really good in that dress. I mean, there are people who will complain about that. I think we need to, put it in perspective, don't we? The worrying thing about this is we've always told you there's one-offs, there's some bad people. There are going to be bad people in every walk of life. Look, we see cases, of, doctors and those who are a threat to their patients, for goodness sake. But this does seem that we've got a barrel with not just some rotten apples, but an awful lot of rotten apples, and everyone's aware of who the rotten apples are, and we know they're rotten apples when we put them in the barrel to become police officers, and nothing's being done. What would you do if there's one thing you could do today as a former police officer? What would you do to change things?
I would create a safe environment for officers to report each other. You shouldn't have anonymous lines. Officers should be brave enough and then should be supported to report their colleagues' behaviour. That would be the one thing that I would do.
Okay, it's always so good to talk to you. You have been fantastic at speaking out and calling out issues.